Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our presentation. I will just do a little switch and share my screen. So just bear with me for a minute here. So glad to see you. And I still see some people entering the room. So my name is Regina Gong, and I am presenting with um, Cynthia Orozco and Ariana Santiago. You will hear, their introduction in a little bit. So really glad that you are able to attend this afternoon session. I hope you're having a good second day of Open Ed. Okay, so we'll start with just telling our individual story, kind of like introducing you to my positionality, where I'm coming from. So I am a Filipina American. English is not my second language. I came here to the US as an immigrant 20 years ago. And I am also married to an immigrant. He's Chinese. And I am a mom of two teenagers. And I am also a third year doctoral student at Michigan State and in higher ed administration. So my foray into OER is at a community college where I stayed for 9 years. It's a predominantly white institution, and I was the only woman of color librarian in that library. And right now, I lead an OER program at a land grant research intensive institution. That's Michigan State University. And my work is solely focused on OER. So that is really refreshing. Cynthia?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's still morning in California. My name is Cynthia Orozco. I am the librarian for Equitable Services at East Los Angeles College, which is a really big community college in LA. And I am a traditional librarian. I do information literacy instruction, reference outreach, but I end up being the de facto OER librarian. My campus really doesn't have any OER initiatives, no designated person on campus doing OER, no funding, but there's this new kind of expectation. First it was like, we don't know what OER is, so we're just gonna pretend like it's not a thing. And now it's like, okay, this is important for equity. And then our administration's like, okay, go do equity, go do OER. Like it's just something you can pick up and sorry, words are hard in COVID times. Anyways, so we're a majority minority institution. We're mostly, our students are predominantly students of color, predominantly Latinx. A high percentage of our students are low income. Most of them are on fee waivers. 75% of our students are first generation. And for me, it's just unconscionable to have a campus like ours in which students are struggling to pay tuition, food, just life expenses, and then we still are requiring these really expensive textbooks. So that's kind of why I'm here. And I have a lot of other thoughts.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ariana Santiago, and I'm the OER coordinator at the University of Houston Libraries. And I've only been in this position since 2018, so I still feel pretty new to OER. But I am in a full-time OER position, and I do have access to some funding as well as administrative support for OER at my institution. So in that sense, I feel like I have a little bit of a different journey into OER because I know so many people have to fit OER work on top of an already full plate of responsibilities or advocate for a really long time for this work to be recognized and supported. UH is also a majority minority institution. We have a high percentage of low income and first generation students. And we're also an R1 university, so research activity is a priority for our faculty. But I find that a lot of them, at least a lot of the faculty I've worked with so far, they really see and understand the impact that OER can have for our students, specifically in making education more accessible and more affordable. But I also don't want to sound like, oh, everything's great. We're fortunate to have OER in a full-time position, and a lot of our faculty do get it. But of course, there's a lot of work still to do, and I'm trying to be more intentional about incorporating inclusive and equitable practices as I lead our OER program. And I think I'll leave it at that and pass it back to Cynthia.
Great. So what we hope to achieve in this session is to share and or actively listen to counter stories around OER work as from women of color. So this session stems from our experiences just in predominantly white, sometimes male spaces. We kind of have experience in one way or another being in an OER space and just not seeing ourselves. So last Open Ed in 2019, we had done a first round of this kind of WOC and OER presentation. And I think it was my second Open Ed, and it was just amazing to see so many women of color in the room, which I hadn't experienced previously. So that was really exciting. We also want to share and contextualize their own lived experiences as women of color in OER with other participants within the dominant narrative, and question existing OER infrastructure and strategize for an inclusive and transformative open education community. So for some ground rules, if Regina, you can go to the next slide. We'd actually like to use progressive stacking, which I just honestly remembered. So if you identify as a woman of color, if you could change your, I don't know what happened to the slides, but rename yourself and put just an asterisk in front of your name. So when we get to the sharing session, we would like to prioritize women of color experiences. So I've modeled that in my name. So just you can put your an asterisk right in front of your name. So hover over your name and participants and rename in Zoom. You can use pseudonyms. This is a recorded session, so remember that this is kind of all public. So if you don't want to have your name associated with this, that might be appropriate. And we're gonna employ the use of the raise hand function. So if you would like to share at any point, please raise your hand and then we can try to get through the list in order. This is a space for storytelling by and for women of color and respectful listening. So, if there's time for other questions or comments, we can allow that, but we're going to firstly prioritize women of color experiences. For tweets, this is an open session. This is being recorded. Just getting back to the kind of Open Ed procedure, everything is recorded. This session is CC BY. We're going to use a Jamboard later that we're going to publish, and that is also going to be CC BY. So just remember that this is on the record, and share what you're willing to put in CC BY, I guess. As far as tweets go, tweets are totally part of Open Ed, but think about who gets the credit, because a lot of times people will get all the likes or the retweets when it's the person who's sharing the story. Maybe it's more appropriate for them to share their own story or not. And we don't know how today's going to go. This is a little bit open mic-y, free form, go with the flow. So there might be awkward silence, and that's super okay. So just be comfortable with the silence.
Thank you, Cynthia and Ariana. And Cynthia mentioned, some information about Woke in OER. Really, this started last Open Ed. So for those of you who were in the session last year when Open Ed was in Phoenix, we had a session called Woke in OER, and that really stemmed from our experiences, as Cynthia mentioned, of being sometimes the only woman of color in our institution, and certainly, a few maybe doing OER work. So this is like just taking you back, to the time when we can still, gathered together. It seems like ages ago when that happened. So this is from last year. It was really a very powerful presentation, lots of women of color, people of color in the room. And really we shared from our own personal experience. And if you were there were lots of tears. So to me personally, that was cathartic because I was never able to share the experience that I had. And it was really a release. So that's another view of the session that we had last year. So what we ask women of color are like these questions. What are the challenges you see affecting women of color OER leaders? And how can women of color be empowered as leaders in open education? And the slides that I am going to share are the things that women of color have told us. And so through to the description of this session, it really are like stories, narratives, and experiences that you will hear from us. So there are few women of color in OER at my college. You know, certainly that I mean, in my institution, I am the only one doing OER work, of course. In my previous institution, I was the only woman of color librarian. Fortunately, here at MSU, it's a diverse group of library staff. And so I don't feel that I am alone. And then women of color always have to, I can't read, prove their authority and knowledge. And also our challenges continue to be microaggressions, racism and sexism, emotional labor, projects getting co-opted, always fighting for recognition. Unequal credit as faculty with comparable achievements. When a man does it, he gets funding, recognition, and sabbatical. I see huge disparities in OER infrastructures across institutions. While I am so proud of the work being done, I can't understand how this work isn't happening at some of the campuses that need it the most. There is a lot of emotional labor involved in this work. As librarians, we often do OER work on top of all the many things we have to do. There are very few positions dedicated to OER, and that is not right. So personally, that was my experience before, you know, and I was doing OER on top of the other responsibilities that I do. And that my former institution wasn't able to create a separate position, just, you know, focus on OER. And this is not an isolated case because a lot, especially librarians who are leading OER projects, a lot of them are doing this on top of what they already do, as Ariana mentioned earlier when she was introducing herself. And so for us now, for me, with my job solely focus on OER, it allows me to not just focus on OER, but really feel that I am doing something and making a difference because I have that sole focus. And then in terms of opportunities for us to participate, we understand bias content when we see it. So these are the things that if you are an ally or, you know, what can you do? What can you do for us to amplify our voices? We wish we are given mentorship support networks, appreciation, and recognition of the good work we do in a public way. We hope people in power make space for us and make that support visible. And this is really, so this, I know there's a lot of text in this slide, but I really want to highlight this. This is from Drew Carter, who was an OpenStax student intern participant. He was there as other students were also there in our presentation last year. He was in the room, and this is his blog. So he wrote about his experiences during OpenEd 19, and this is what he said. It made me interrogate how the OER community could possibly be open to some, but not all. A community that is constantly shifting, progressing forwards, and growing means that if we aren't paying close attention, some individuals could be left behind. And Felicia is also one of the student interns at OpenStax who was in the room at the time when we were doing the presentation last year. And she said, looking around and seeing a room full of women of color who look like me is really inspiring and hopeful for the future of diverse OER leaders. So I've just, given you some of the stories of women of color, and we can talk more. Ariana will walk us through what is gonna happen next.
Yeah, so thank you, Regina, for taking us through all that and the discussion we had last year at the OpenEd conference. So now we're hoping to continue that discussion and build upon it. So we're moving into the discussion part of today's section. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in terms of what to expect for today, this will be a large group discussion facilitated by myself, Cynthia, and Regina. And we decided not to use small breakout rooms today. And we're all just going to stay together in this big Zoom room. We do have a few discussion questions, which I'll show you in just a few slides. And we ask that you use the raise hand tool in Zoom when you want to say something, and then we'll call on people to then unmute your mic and add to the discussion. And I believe the raise hand tool is in the participants panel in Zoom. Feel free to correct me or help each other out in the chat if someone can't find the raise hand tool at any point. As Cynthia explained earlier, we are using progressive stacking for the discussion. So as a reminder, and for people who maybe joined the session later, if you identify as a woman of color, take a moment to make sure that you have an asterisk in front of your name. So you'll probably see many people have asterisks in front of their names and others don't. And you can do that by renaming yourself in Zoom. So just hover over your name and click more and then rename, then you can put that asterisk. So this way, as people contribute to the discussion, we'll be calling on women of color first to center those voices and perspectives. But I also want to say, please don't feel pressured to speak up if you don't feel ready to right now, right? We're in a Zoom session with a lot of people that you probably don't know, and it's being recorded. So it's perfectly understandable to not want to put yourself out there in front of an audience like that. And I would probably be one of those people if I wasn't co-facilitating this session who kind of hangs back and maybe is a little quieter. So I totally get it. And we know with this kind of big group format, some people might feel kind of put on the spot to speak up as a woman of color attending this session. And, we hope that you don't feel unnecessarily pressured to do so. It's perfectly fine to not. But of course, if you're in a place where you want to and you're ready to say what's on your mind, definitely go for it, because that's a big part of what this session is about. Also, everyone here is invited and welcome to participate in the discussion, even if you're not a woman of color. We think it's important for everyone to be thinking about and actively listening to and also engaging in this. Just know that's why we're using the progressive stacking method to center women of color voices. So we'll be calling on them first, but everyone else also feel free to raise your hand when you have something to add. I've kind of spent a long time on that. The last point here is just that we have a Google Jamboard set up, and this is for women of color to also be able to share their thoughts asynchronously and potentially anonymously. So yes, we have the link in the chat already to the Jamboard. Next slide. And I just wanted to take a minute to sort of show the Jamboard for everyone, because I know not everyone will have used a Jamboard before. It's basically like a whiteboard where you all are able to edit and add to it. On the left-hand side, you have multiple tools, so you can add sticky notes, text boxes, even upload images and things like that. And then at the top is where you can scroll through the different pages. So we have the discussion questions on different Jamboard pages, as well as just general space to share your stories and thoughts. And next slide. So that was a lot of preamble to get to setting up the discussion. So here are the discussion questions that we put together today to sort of frame our discussion here. So what is it like for women of color in OER to navigate spaces steeped in whiteness and racism? How do we increase participation and amplify voices of women of color in OER? And what would an inclusive, equitable, empowering, and affirming environment look like for women of color in OER? So feel free to respond to any or all of these, but also we're open to going wherever the conversation takes us, as well as this just being a space for women of color to share their stories in whatever way they want to, whether it's in response to these questions or not. So yeah, we'll move into sort of our open mic time, and please use the raise hand tool.
Yeah, Maya, go for it.
Thank you for organizing this. This is so crucial to have this conversation. I've come to this conference very optimistic, but I can't help but feel like slightly cynical that I feel like so much of creating this sort of inclusive and equitable empowerment amongst women of color would have to fall on like mentorship, which in and of itself is wonderful. But then I start to think of like all of that emotional labor and all of that like added time. And I wonder if mentorship is the only way. I certainly hope not. Or I wonder if there was a way to account for that like additional relational efforts that go into cultivating this sort of generational empowerment, right? From leaders to new folks who identify as woke in OER. Not to be a downer, sorry.
Oh, Maya, I think that is really an important question to ask, and mentorship really plays a crucial role, but it also is like if you are looking for a mentor that's a woman of color, that's not a lot of us. And personally, I find a lot of how do I say it? even non-women of color. So men and women, white men, white women come to me and say, Regina, I want to pick your brain. I want to learn from you. Can we have a meeting? Can we do this? Can you help? So, I mean, while I am very, very happy to do so, sometimes, you know, it really takes a lot out of me. It really is like, you know, an immense emotional labor on my part, but part of it is the guilt too that I feel for not doing enough to help, you know, my fellow woman of color. And so yeah, I don't know the answer for that. I wish, you know, a lot of the leadership programs on OER will specifically allot, I don't know, half of the scholarships to women of color, or encourage more women of color to do OER work, because a lot of us don't come here as in a straightforward path, right? So
Yeah, Maya, I wouldn't apologize for being cynical. I get that too. You know, whenever you criticize open, it seems like you're the bad guy. But open, there's like this determinism of open that's like open's going to liberate us. And it's like, wait, there's still these like unbalanced power structures that we need to be looking at. So I could talk about that forever. I know Nicole's had her hand raised. So Nicole, did you want to share?
Yes. So I kind of wanted to speak to discussion question 2. So when I think about how we can increase participation and amplify voice of, you know, women of color in OER, so I'm a librarian, so I look at it from a library perspective. And I think before we can even talk about that, it's like, how do we get women of color in librarianship? And I know that, like, when I talk, because I work with like summer bridge students, undocumented students, because I'm the student success librarian, and all of them are shocked that librarianship is even a job. Like, they don't even realize, like, they think it's some antiquated job, like, you know, being a milkmaid or something. I'm like, no, it's a real job. And I think if we can, I mean, it's almost like we have to start with young people like that we interact with. And then even if you do make that sort of breakthrough that, you know, this is a real job that you could have, a lot of them are like, oh, but do you have to go to grad school? Oh, you do? How much is it? Oh, it's a lot. And like, I know that, you know, my own experience, like my mom immigrating here in the 70s and not speaking English and, you know, picking fruit, like as her first job. I remember when I told her I wanted to be a librarian, she's like, what? Why? Like, like, do you get paid a lot for that? Like, an unpaid internship? Why? Like, why are you working for free? So I think before we could answer something like number 2, we'd even need to go, I don't know, I hate to like put more work on people, but it's like we almost need to start younger with maybe students we interact with, or just younger cousins, or just planting the seed earlier, and maybe sort of with the older generation say like, no, you can make a difference, and you can make a good life for yourself, you know, working in something like OER or something that's kind of social justice leaning.
thank you, Nicole. And we have Gabby and Betsy raising hands. So why don't we start with Betsy and then Gabby? Or
I think Gabby was first though.
Gabby, okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would like to kind of mimic what both previous Maya and Nicole have said. With Maya, thank you so much for hosting these discussions, because as a woman of color, you know, with question 1, I tend to forget how much I've done to kind of mold myself into being what is seen as white, to make sure that I am seen as someone who is knowledgeable. So kind of erasing a lot of what I am as a woman of color to make sure that I fit into the world that is already around me. So having these conversations and bringing that awareness of it's okay to sit as a woman of color and be proud of that and bring that diversity into the work field and kind of remember what that feels like and sitting back into your own skin and living it to its fullest. So that's, what I've seen in myself is that I have done so much erasing in my own personal world to make sure that I fit the environment that's already there, instead of thinking it like this, where we should change the environment to fit diversity of all types, whether it be men or women of color. And then also what Nicole said is, yes, like thinking of librarianship, that we need to somehow educate the younger generation to understand that librarianship is even a position. And I live in South Texas currently, and so 98% of the population. I'm on the Texas and Mexico border, deep South Texas. So 98% of our population is Hispanic, and 98% of our population speak a language other than English as their first language. And I worked both in a public library and an academic library, and the majority of the faces our students see are white librarians. Maybe the assistants and the other people who work in the library may be of color, but the librarian itself who's gotten their master's degree is not a person of color. So it's, trying to go back one step and increase our diversity as librarianship as a whole, so that way women of color can then sit in an OER position like thankfully I am the open education librarian at my university. So being able to just bring that diversity and remember who I am as a diverse woman and make sure that that voice is heard loud and clear is very important. So again, thank you for hosting these discussions and letting us, sit in our bodies comfortably and say what, bring our experiences to the table.
Hi, okay. I appreciate this session. I was wondering, I think that a lot of times this conversation, we need to zoom out a little bit and see that, a lot of the oppressions that are present within OER are reflections of the oppressions within the wider society in which we live. So I'm wondering, to what extent is it possible to achieve equity and reduce oppression in OER without having had that wider societal change? And so I'm wondering, I guess this is more relevant to number 3, what would inclusive, equitable, empowering, and affirming environment? Part of what makes OER necessary is the neoliberal structure of the university and of textbooks and stuff like that. And so in that context, can there be an inclusive, equitable, empowering, and affirming environment? I'm sure there are degrees and things can be done, but I guess I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are overarching structures that need to be dismantled in order for true change.
Since we have a little, thanks for sharing, Betsy. Thanks. Oh, actually, Jessica, I was going to say we could share some of the Jamboard responses, but I would love to hear from Jessica first.
One of the things, I am a librarian, so one of the things that I think about a lot is that we have this very particular focus on the number of women of color in our spaces, in OER, in academic libraries, but we don't really care about like how they experience open education OER libraries. And so this fixation on like quantitative rather than qualitative, I think reflects even some of our comments here, not to be like critical, but sometimes we're just not here. And I hear that all the time, like all the spaces I go into, people are like, people of color are just not here. Women of color are just not here. And that's true. But then we don't often think about how we navigate these spaces, like with microaggressions, cultural taxation, and those real realities and those barriers and structural barriers that we face that oftentimes encourage us to leave and creates this problem in the first place. I don't know if that was a little too roundabout, but that's something I'm thinking about.
You know what, Jessica? I mean, yeah, I think about that too, you know, like especially in my previous institution and then right now when I mean more in my previous institution where, you know, I have like a lot of money that was allocated by administration for faculty support, and that is important, you know, that is important. But they it seems that administration don't really think about the people, and I'm not just talking about librarians, the labor involved in transforming a course into OER. So I mean, you know, that one is really something that I experienced, and the reason why I probably left my previous institution.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Jessica. I'll read a couple of the Jamboard things. You know, you're welcome to follow in this Jamboard too. If you came in late, I'll post it again in the chat right now. So let's see. It sometimes seems like I have to be an expert on equity and decolonization simply because I'm a woman of color. I'm committed to improving equity, but I don't feel like I have the credentials to do the work. When women of color try to build spaces for women of color, we get pushback, often from anyone who feels that this equity-driven action is exclusionary towards them because they don't share our identity. It makes us rethink our reality, and I don't know if it's cut off. Oh, here, there's more. And wait, I didn't realize that Jamboard's like they cut off. I might have to come back to this because I don't know what's happening. Okay. Yeah, it's all a learning process, right? A lot of OER folks are white and seem to feel that OER work itself yields equity. Opening access doesn't yield equity if the content and perspectives are still white. Vocational awe. It's an underpinning of whiteness in libraries and functions to quash critiques of open. Even when women of color are in OER spaces, we still get erased because people fixate on the lack of diversity without thoughtfully considering how women of color experience open education, i.e. people care more about the number of women of color. How do I make this bigger? Concerning how women of color experience open education. Oh, wait, no. i.e. people care more about the number of women of color in a space than actually women of color in the space. Cool.
Betsy, you have your hand raised. Did you have something else to add, or is that your hand still up from before?
Oh, no, I didn't take it down. Thank you. I'll take my hand down.
There are also, I'm just reading the things that are in the chat. So also lots of things in there. think Jennifer raised. Yeah.
Hi. So I guess one of my questions for the panelists or other participants is, how do you all distinguish between, I guess, what a university administrator or office says? So for example, like pays lip service to diversity and inclusion or inclusive excellence and other related buzzwords. And then I think there are times where faculty of color or staff of color kind of, for lack of a better phrase, get sucked into it, right? Like thinking like this is it, like this, it's a hot item, or this is going to be a priority on the agenda, or there's a new person in the office. And then you put in all this labor only to find out that it actually isn't going to be real or genuine or even maybe implemented. So like it's almost like you put in the labor and then you're actually not going to get the outcomes that you thought were either going to be promised or a goal. And so then I guess my question is what advice would you have, like moving forward, being able to identify which things to pick up or not, right? So like, for example, this past summer, especially with a lot of the impact of the Black Lives Matters movement, for instance, a lot of universities were like, okay, we're going to have a diversity office, we're going to have a diversity officer or initiatives, right? We're going to have all these committees. And then they all kind of like looked at us, right? And we're expecting us to like start doing stuff. But either we've already been doing it for a long time, or we want to do it, but quote, not like that, if that makes sense. So like, if there's so few of us, what advice would you have for identifying like which things do we actually locate that are real, that would actually make a difference for us and our students, but also not burn us out in the process?
Jennifer, I'm thinking. So it's, you know, it's.
Oh, sure. And well, I think it's a dilemma, right? Because it's like,
No.
right now,
Yeah.
Like, especially post-election, I'm starting to get all these inquiries about inclusivity and diversity. And I'm like, well, I don't know who to all answer 100% or at 20%, right? Or I don't know, like, is this the committee job I'm going to pick up? Like, when you actually mention that you think you're going to incorporate OER in the curriculum, like, do you really mean that? Or are you just like saying that so you can put down that you checked it off on a box, right? So I feel like there might be more of us who are now at this like juncture of like, wow, we're already tired. We've already been doing a lot. There's probably not going to be a ton more resources, if I'm being realistic, like right in the corner. Like, I don't think there's going to be an infusion of resources. So I'm not quite sure, like, do you just lay low for a while, or do you try to spearhead yet another thing, I guess?
So for me, like, I'm specifically just, you know, talking about my work in OER. I can't do it all. So I recognize that. And so the things that I can affect, I do. So for example, in our OER award program, there is a criteria there that, you know, the more faculty of color apply, I mean, you know, we almost like approve the application because we want a lot of them, or many of them, to be OER creators, especially in the OER creator category, because we all know, right, that a lot of the OER being created are from the point of view of Western mindset. And so a lot of our OER awardees the past year, half of them were faculty of color. So I feel that in my, in our own small way, we can do it. And you mentioned about diversity, like the DEI training has now just been made mandatory for all staff at MSU. So, and that was because of the racial justice protest that has happened over in the summer. So, it's like, okay, does that answer our commitment to equity and racial justice if all of us just take diversity training and then just check it off? So I don't know. I don't have the answer.
I wanted to address the comment that said we should have we should meet more, like not just once a year. I totally agree with that. And I actually had said, should we, kick off like a monthly kind of like a la Spark or whatever, monthly women of color and OER group. And I was like, that sounds cool. But the other half of me is like so burnt out on doing that work, but totally something that I think the community should talk about, because I think that'd be great. How about Amy? Amy, did you want to share?
Yeah, I'm not a librarian. I work for an organization. I work for Pressbook, so I work in a platform that creates OERs, and I'm very new to this, and it's been really fascinating because I am one of the only women of color in my organization, and I'm very new to the OER scene. So this has been super informative and very helpful. And I wanted to add on Regina's comment and there's comments in the chat going off about how diversity trainings are sort of band-aids. And even in my interactions every day, it's hard because if you're not a person of color and if you're not a woman of color, there's only so much that you think about that sort of go missing. So for example, like things like microaggressions come up really frequently, even for me as someone who doesn't work in an organization, who doesn't work as a librarian or at an institution, but just even in my work, like there's only so much that people who are not POC or women of color, they don't think about those things. And I don't know, and all I wanted to say is that I don't know what the solutions to these issues are. And it's because there's no easy solution to make people start thinking about issues they've never had to think of in their entire lives. And I feel like that has been something that's been very challenging for me just as an adult to navigate through. And I just wanted to echo what Regina was saying and what people were saying in the chat and say that I definitely feel like diversity trainings are in the right direction, but definitely to see them in full effect, I don't know what the right solution is. And yeah, I just wanted to share that sentiment.
Cynthia, are there new things in the Jamboard that was put on?
There's a lot of new things in the Jamboard, but I know that we're also quickly running out of time. So I wanted to say, maybe, I don't know if there's like one more comment that someone wants to have in the last, one or two more comments in the last 5 minutes. This is kind of like your last chance in this very short 55-minute span to share something in this space. I'll read something while maybe people think about it. Let's see. I advocate for getting paid for doing OER work and still feel bad when I am actually compensated. What is that guilt even? Yeah, I get that. I feel really bad about getting paid. The open and OER work can and ought to be used to create inclusive spaces, but it can't be the only tool to liberate. It alone won't save us. Change happens on multiple fronts. And and a +1 for that. Cool. So I think we have a comment. So, or we have a hand raised, and we have some time. So Ethan, you have a minute.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me a chance. I just wanted to say thank you to the panelists and to everybody else that spoke, just for spending your time to make this space and to tell your stories. I just wanted to ask if in this forum where it will be recorded and reshared, and we won't have to ask you to say this multiple times over for everybody individually, if you could share, if you're willing to, the biggest things that you want to see from allies in this space to support you and your work.
Oh, I have a great thing about allies. I just went to this training on campus for, it was an allied program for foster youth. And it was the foster youth were saying, you know, you don't get to call yourself an ally. We have to designate you as an ally. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, who are the people who are showing up, who are actively listening? There's something like hard to say. It's really hard to articulate, but yeah, I feel like I have a lot of true allies. It's the people who actually listen to me, people who, you know, understand my problems, don't co-opt anything, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, I get really flustered when I'm running low on time. Regina and Aria, I don't know if you have anything to say.
I think
Kind of like, oh, go ahead, Regina.
I think, Ethan, thank you for that. You know, just like what we mentioned, step back and elevate the voices of those people who might not have the voice, and so and give them a chance, you know, like provide them the pathways so they can lead. And when they are doing that work, support them in such a way that they feel that the work that they do is meaningful and not just a burden on them. Ariana.
I was gonna say, I feel like I probably don't have a great answer right now. It's a really important question, also a big question. So I feel like I'm gonna kind of +1 both of your responses. And also, I guess, just think about, like, what are you doing in your ally work? Like, what are you actually doing? What are you actively doing? And that's something I'm asking myself too, in terms of how I'm being an ally to other people as well.
And just a plug, tomorrow we will have for tea time session at 1:30, I think. Ariana, Cynthia, and I will be there. So if you want to join us, continue the conversation, or, you know, it doesn't have to be this conversation, but we will be there. So yeah, and I hope we get the chance to get together, find the space virtually and in person, if that ever happens, so that we can build on, you know, build on this space.
Logistically, the Jamboard will still be open. I think we'll leave it open for the rest of the conference through Friday. So if you need time to think about it, please save the link, add your story, and we're going to actually put this, we'll make it available on the website for Open Ed, but also it'll be in the MSU IR as well.
Okay, everyone, this session is now at its time, and I will stop the recording.